Welcome to the High Quality Fun podcast where tough times make good stories. On today's episode, we talk to Iris Pessey, a seasoned endurance athlete who grew up in the French Alps with her twin brother. Growing up here allowed her to pick up cross-country skiing from a young age, which ultimately led to lots of competition, including the Arctic Circle Race, which we discuss at length. Iris now spends her time coaching, competing in skyrunning and paragliding back home. Stay tuned and enjoy this episode of the High Quality Fun podcast.
Sure. So I grew up here in the French Alps in a little ski resort with my twin brother and my two little sisters who are twins as well. So weird family dynamics, two sets of twins, but that was good. I was not really into competing when I was a young kid, but my twin brother was my idol, and then he was doing cross-country skiing, so I picked it up after doing other sports like judo, tennis, downhill skiing, and then mainly snowboarding. And turns out I was not too bad at it, so I got into sports school, into like the development programs for future professional athletes. I picked up biathlon, and I did it until I was 19. Then I went back to just being a professional skier while I was I was studying at university in France. And I was doing random little jobs on the side just for a bit of pocket money. And I went to University World Champs in Slovakia. And there I met a guy called Jorgen. It's funny, I actually just spent 1 month with him here in France. He's Norwegian. And he was the commentator from the races on Eurosport. And he saw me racing. And he was like, "Oh, do you want to meet up with me?" And I was like, "Oh, don't try and hit on me. That's not going to work." And he's like, "No. We were at the bars." And he was like, "Come to my room. We're going to call my coach and offer you a scholarship so you can come and live with me in the US." And I was like, "What the hell? Absolutely not. Dude, I'm not coming to your room to talk to your coach." But turns out he was really serious about it. And I received a scholarship offer from the University of Vermont a few weeks later. And really quickly, in less than a month, I was like, okay, I really need to learn English now to pass the test, and did my visa and so on. And then off I went and bailed on everything in France. So my skiing career here, I had a really 7 years long-term boyfriend here. And I moved to the US and started studying and skiing there. It went okay. It was a really good experience. I was in Vermont during the school year, and then in the summer I was in Oregon. And after graduating, I couldn't find a job in my area of studying. I studied political science and applied economics, but didn't really find a job that suited me. And without a job in the field you've studied, you can't get a visa. And I didn't want to go back to France because it was a bit of a step back, and I didn't want to ski anymore. I was quite burnt out from competing. So I applied to some random jobs. I had my twin brother in New Zealand and didn't quite work. So I ended up being in Australia. And I was working as a ski instructor and doing a bit of private coaching on the side. And there I met Phil, who became my boyfriend, and he was going to the Olympics that year. So he needed to be in Europe. So we came back to Europe, and I didn't want to train or be an athlete much, but because he was training for the Olympics and we were both working, the only time I could spend with him was during his training when he was waking up at 5 a.m. to go for a run or for a ski. So I just did that mainly to be with him. And I ended up doing some races. I won the biggest ski race in Australia, and everybody thought that was a big deal. And I was like, oh, maybe skiing is actually fun, and I enjoyed it again. So while he was training for the Olympics, I decided to register for the Chinese ski tour, which is like a 3-week-long competition in China with multiple stage races. And I really enjoyed skiing again. And then after the Olympics, Phil didn't really handle it well. Like, it's really hard when you focus on an event for 4 years and then it suddenly all stopped. So he decided to race to a random race when we were back in France after traveling Asia for a few months. And it was a 6-hour uphill race and you were taking the gondola down, but the registration were closed. So I emailed the race organizer and I was like, really talked him up. I was like, oh, I'm coming with these great athletes. He is just back from the Olympics. He came top 30 on World Cup for cross-country skiing this year. Please invite him. And can I have a bib also? And the guy was so excited and he wrote to the new local newspaper to make an article about him. They really talked him up. They invited us to the hotel and so on. And come race day, he didn't run fast at all. He didn't even come top 5 with the women. And I did well. So the organizer was like, oh, can you be one of our athletes for the next races? We'll take you in the team. There is like financial benefits and gear. And I was like, no, I do absolutely not want to be an athlete. I've been there, done that. I know what it's like to have a coach, pressure from the sponsors, qualifying to races and so on. But one of the girls I used to race for in France for skiing was in the team. And she was like, Iris, we really do need a person for national champs. Please just do nationals and that's it. And I guess that's how I got into trail running. And then for a few years, I was back in Australia from June to October, November, working there as a ski instructor and also then the coach for Australia, for the junior team. And then in the winter, I was in Europe, but with my Australian athletes. So I was mainly living for my work. But I kept on doing a few races, both running and skiing, but I wasn't taking it very seriously. And then with Phil, the Australian boyfriend, he really wanted to do the Arctic Circle race. And so I got into that race as well, just to spend time with him after a winter of being apart. So instead of a classic holiday at the beach and having some sun after the winter, here I am in Greenland, racing above the Arctic Circle. So the Arctic Circle race is 170 kilometers. During the night, it goes down to -30. There's, I think, 4,000 meters of elevation. And you sleep in tents in between the stages because it's a 3-day stage race. And I ended up winning. So then they invited me again, but then the following year it got cancelled and so on. And so I didn't do it for a few years. And I went back last year with Philippe again, even though we had broken up by then. And the very special thing about the last edition is I got home from a winter coaching the Australian biathlon team then, because I switched job from being with the Australian Federation to the British one, and from Nordic to biathlon. And my dad was like, oh, you're so lucky. You always travel to cool places and you do such good things. Like, you're so lucky you're going to Greenland. I was like, Dad, are you trying to send a message here? Do you want to come? And he's like, no, I'll let you and be with Phil. Like, it will be good for the two of you to do something together again. And I was like, no, Dad, like, please come. Like, I would love to have you here. And it was his birthday, so we bought him plane tickets with my siblings too, so he could come. And he did the race, actually. So the last edition, I was more worried about my dad racing than myself. But it was so cool to having, like, he just wanted to finish the race. He didn't have any, like, performing goal. But at his age and with the life he's lived, I'm super proud he did it as well. So really, it's, like, I think sometimes we focus on people who won the race, like I did last year. But I'm not the hero there, because for me, it's easy to ski for 5-6 hours every day in the cold. Like, I've done that my entire life. I'm young, I'm fit. But for someone like my dad, like, for me, it's much more rewarding and it's a lot more impressive because he spends a lot more time out there in the cold. It's a much bigger effort for someone like him than for myself. So yeah, those races, they're great, but they are not only for the elite athletes. And that's what I like with sports like long distance skiing or trail running. It's that you're all in the same boat, whether you're a top athlete or just a nobody, if I can say, but I'm not saying that in a rude way. There you
Yeah,
go.
I mean that's really cool, and that's something that I've really liked pulling apart with this podcast is just finding people that, you know, they don't necessarily win, but people that are willing and able to push the boundaries of you know, their physical being, their mental state. I'm training for a marathon right now, and like I've never done that before, so this is the first time I've really trained for anything since high school. So I'm pushing myself in ways that I haven't done in over 10 years, and you know, I'm not going to place or anything, but it's really fun to challenge myself in that way. And that's wildly impressive that your dad was able to kind of just sign up for this and do what some people consider the hardest cross country race in the world. Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, I'm really, really proud of him. And I think we have a family group chat, and all my uncles and my cousins, they were all cheering for him and not for me, even though I won the race, he was the hero. And I'm like, well, yeah, as he should be. Like, good for you. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
I think sometimes we, as a society, we put professional athletes a bit on a pedestal, but I mean, it's not that hard to be a professional sports person when you're getting paid to go train, and that's the only thing you have to focus on is yourself and perform. But the people who do the same thing and they have a job and a family on the side, to me, it's a lot more impressive, and they are just as deserving, yet they don't often get the recognition they should.
Yeah, and you throughout this story, I mean, you went from France to Vermont to Australia back to France. There's been a handful of moments where you're just like, no, I'm done. I've seen that. I've done the competitive stuff. I don't need it anymore. Like, how do you think about now, and how has that changed over time? Like, how has your mentality on competing changed from high school to now, since you've pretty much done it your whole life?
It's funny because when we were kids, my dad was the president of the telemark national team, and he used to be a ski coach, but he never pushed us into sport. And my mom, she was a paraglider and a skydiver, but she hated competition. And we grew up with her telling us that professional athletes were so selfish and self-oriented, and we were only allowed to be in the ski club if we were also doing art or music. So I actually did piano for over 10 years because my mom was like, you are not just going to be a sport person. And then I got into the system of making it to the national team and so on, and it became my focus. But I'm really happy she taught me that sport is not everything, that there will be an end. And also, it's not because you're a good athlete that you're a good person, and that's not what people are going to remember. And I think she was scared of me being disappointed and seeing myself as a failure. So she really taught me that to love myself for other things than my sports achievements. But then I got a bit caught up in the system of performing and qualifying for races all the time and wanting to be the best, until it was too much and unhealthy. And I think that's something my mom put in my head also. She was like, well, if you do too much sport later on as a woman, like, it's really hard to get pregnant. And I was quite often injured. And so after the US, I was like, okay, it's probably time for me to be done with that. And I felt I'd got out of the national team system in France. If I went back to France and went back to skiing, I would fall back into this, and it would be such a big step back. So I just wanted to work and see a bit more of the world. But I guess I love sport. I love exercising. And then I saw like being invited to China, even though I wasn't a pro, like I was still really good because I had trained for so many years. It's not like a few months off that are going to make you like fully off. It's not that hard to maintain a good level when you've worked so hard. So like I might as well just make the most of it and get invited to those races in Korea and China, because it's a great way to travel without to have to pay the bill. And also, like when you do races, you meet people, you're with others. It's not like traveling alone somewhere, taking a few pictures and not sharing it with anyone. So I think that's what kept me going with racing. And then in Australia, it was really good to race because they had a great community for skiing there. And then on Saturdays, I was doing the park runs, the 5K park runs they do everywhere in the world. You just show up in the morning and then you've got like a barcode and you do a 5K run. And then you're with other people, you meet people who run as well. So yeah. And then somehow I got a sponsorship with Scott for running and got invited to races. The first big one I did was Transvulcania in the Canary Islands, where I'm going back there in 2 weeks, actually. I'm very excited for that. I was like, it's actually a great way of just having a pure pose when you travel. And I think that's more what kept me racing than wanting to be the best.
Yeah, I like that.
Paying for it, you still need to be quite decent. So you still have to train and perform well.
Yeah, it is. It's something to have like a purpose for going places, like a something you're working towards to kind of keep you on your toes and to point you where you're going to travel to. I really like that. Yeah, what was I going to say? You mentioned this kind of earlier in our like pre-intro crawl that you don't love identifying as a professional athlete. Like it sounds like you could do this or you've done it at moments in your time, but you, with your friends and family and everything that you learned from your mom, you are still working full time and kind of living this normal lifestyle. Like, do you have anything that you want to pull apart on that?
I'm not working full time at the moment. Well, some people would say I do, but I work a lot from my computer, so I don't really consider it full time. Because at the moment, but it's very recent. But until recently, I was working full time. But yeah, it's very important for me to keep working. In the winter, so from November to March, I live with the British biathlon team and I travel with my athletes to their events, their competition, their races. So I'm more focused on their performances than mine. Yet I still wake up every morning at 5 and put my headlamp on and go run in the woods and in the dark. And I do it to perform in the summer, but I also do it because it's the time of the day where they're all in bed and no one's going to call me, so I can do something with myself. And then I come back home and we usually have like big Airbnbs we live all together. It's 7:30 in the morning and I'm sitting at breakfast with them and I'm like, okay, I've done something for myself. Now I can focus on you guys.
I like that. Anytime I work out in the morning before people, I just feel like I've already accomplished something before the rest of the people. Yeah. I want to come back to the coaching and the biathlon stuff, but you've been talking about all this running that you've been doing lately. And when I was doing research on you, I learned the term skyrunning, which I never heard about before. I was hoping that you could explain a little bit about that and how you got into skyrunning.
So I got into trail running first and didn't know many things. I've always been running, but I didn't even call it trail running. I was just going running. And because there's just one road where I live and it's pretty boring, I just go run in the mountains. It's a lot more enjoyable. So I've done it my entire life, but I did a few competitions for training through skiing. And then I got into trail running and I quickly realized I was quite agile on sketchy terrain. I wasn't afraid of heights. I've always been good with altitude. And I just wanted to do races that were stunning. And I have no interest running on a 4-wheel truck path. I prefer when it's like some really sketchy singles where it's not only your running abilities who are going to make you good, it's also how you feel in the mountains and hopping on rocks and stuff. So I discovered skyrunning which is that. And the races are usually at quite high altitude. There's a lot of elevation gain and drop, which is really good for me because I'm not that quick on the flat parts. And sometimes you use ropes to be laid on. And yeah, it's basically you start from a village, you take the highest peak, you go to the very top of the peak, and then you come down. And I just find it a lot more exciting. And I realized there's a World Cup series for this. So I've been focusing on those for 3 years. And for the last 2 years, I've been leading the World Cup until the very last race of each season. So I'm very frustrated, even though I'm not that competitive, but that's really frustrating to be ranked at the top of the list. And then 2 years ago, I got stung by a bee during the finals, and I'm allergic, so yeah, it wasn't very glamorous. And last year, I had an accident at work 2 weeks before, and I actually raced in a sling with a dislocated shoulder.
Do you want to go into that accident? I know that you've kind of been out of this running for a while because you just got surgery on it.
Yeah, so I got surgery in January. Right now we're in April. I've been running again for 3 weeks, and I'm back on the World Cup next week. Because last week the doctor said I could run again. So I'm like, okay, perfect. World Cup next week. Let's go. I'm probably not going to be that good because, well, let's be realistic. I just spent 3 months sitting on my ass. So I know I'm not that fast. I had issues with my shoulders since the US. So I was 23 back then, 22, and I'm 31 at the moment. Almost 32. So it's been 10 years. The first time I did it was roller skiing in Vermont. And then the second time was where it really did a lot of damages. I went skydiving. And as I exited the plane, my shoulder popped out. So I did 3,000 meters of drop with a dislocated shoulder and my arm flapping on the other side of my body. So really the shoulder came out and I felt the top of the bone just going around the tendons, and it destroyed everything. And as I landed, that entire part of my body was down to my chest. So I went to the emergency, they put it back in place, and they're like, oh, it's not just a simple dislocation, it's a lot more, you need to do more exams. I was like, yeah, okay, I'll take care of that as soon as I'm healed, because like the wound was so big they couldn't fully analyze. And I went to racing with a sling again for a few months, and then I had to go back to work in Australia. And there the medical bills are just crazy expensive. So I was like, oh, I'll just get checked when I go back to France in 4 months because I can somewhat use my arm again. And then I was working in Switzerland for 4 months, and then I just never did any exams on my shoulder and lived off like this. But last fall, I had an accident at work in Germany. Just a stupid thing with an athlete at the gym kicked me in the shoulder, and my shoulder popped out on the other, and it went on in my back. So I went to Skyrunning finals, racing in a sling. Here we go again. And then same thing. They're like, oh, you need more checks. Your shoulder is in a really bad state. And I'll do that later. And at Christmas, I was at home and I was like, okay, maybe I'll get it checked before I go back to work during the Christmas break. And I did, I don't know what it's called in English, but those things where they put contrast liquid in your tendons. And they're like,
injections, I think. Yeah, I don't know what they call that.
Yeah. And dude, you've got basically no tendons and the top of your bone is broken in 3 different places. How is your shoulder holding itself in place? I was like, well, I don't know. I've been living like this for 5-6 years and it's been fine. And I know you need to get surgery tomorrow. I was like, I'm not getting surgery tomorrow. I'm going to Korea coaching youth Olympics. I can't bail on my athletes now. So like, okay, you're getting surgery today. You get back. I was like, what's the big deal? Like, I swear I'm fine. But then I started realizing, yeah, okay, I'm actually compensating all the time. And I'm always scared when I'm doing paragliding or rock climbing because I know my shoulder is unstable. I can feel it. And I'm always scared, like, rock climbing to reach something to hide, and if my feet slip, and so I decided to go through surgery, and here I am. Now I'm brand new.
Now you're brand new.
Yeah.
You can do everything that you've been doing for the past 5 years, but better.
Exactly.
So your I'll just say this, like, your lifestyle is kind of wild, but I have to keep remembering that you're from the French Alps, and so a lot of this stuff, a lot of this like paragliding, skydiving, skyrunning, cross country skiing, like, I assume all that's pretty common out there, and you were probably exposed to it from an early age. Like, it sounds like you actually did cross country skiing as a sport in high school.
Yeah, and my parents, they weren't really into competition, but if it was a very snowy day with very good powder, my mom would take us out of classes to bring us downhill skiing. And the teachers were like, "Oh, we need a good excuse." And my mom was like, "Well, my good excuse is there's good snow." The teachers would get really mad at her, but I mean, she's her mom. She can do whatever she wants with her children. And yeah, my dad my mom also, they would take us rock climbing and hiking. And so yeah, we've always been doing lots of outdoor sports. And we were living we don't have animals, but it used to be a farm that they renovated into like a chalet. It's in the middle of fields and there's a river next to it. So after school every day, we were just building dams and being at the river or in the fields with my brother. And because we were twins, we were always together, trying to push each other to just do crazy stuff. Even simple things like building a tree house. That seems like nothing, but how many kids actually build tree houses every day nowadays, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a couple places we could take this. I want to go back to the Arctic Circle to talk about that a little bit. When you search up this Arctic Circle race, people claim that it's the hardest cross country skiing event in the world. I don't know if you believe that or not, or what your stance is on that, but I want to understand why. Like, it is a multi-day event. You are trekking through some very unforgiving conditions and camping in little, tent cities at the end of every night. Yeah, and like my understanding is that this entire town, this like desolate town, remote town in the middle of Greenland, they kind of come alive for this event. 10-20% of the population there volunteers to put this event on, and it's like a huge thing for that town. So I guess I just want to hear more about it and more about your experience doing it with you and with your dad.
Yeah, well, when people say something is the hardest race in the world, it's like, well, what's hardest? Is it harder to run 1K as hard as you can, like it really burns, or is it harder to run 50K? In the end, when you run 50K, you're not going that hard. So like you can't go at the same pace as you were on a 1K.
Yeah.
So you suffer a little bit less, but for longer. But does it make it harder than going all out for shorter? And it's the same with the circle race. Like, I don't know, I've done like the tour of China, for example, was maybe 12 races in 2 weeks or something like this. And you travel from Beijing to Inner Mongolia, back to Beijing, racing every day, doing lots of time in trains. And like that to me is a lot more exhausting because there's all the logistic and the stress around it. Whereas once you're on the Arctic Circle race, it's a pretty easy life. You just go out, you ski, and then you sleep in your little tent and you eat some food and you've got nowhere to be. It's really extreme. It gets really cold, but also it's gorgeous. Like somehow I thought Greenland was just flat. It's really not flat, and there's real mountains, and the people are so nice. The volunteers are so cool. The first year we got really bad weather. The start was pushed back because of the wind, and everything was flying off on the second stage. And I couldn't get myself out of the tent actually because the zipper froze during the night. Because it was that cold. So yeah, it is hard, but like physically it's hard also, but it's so enjoyable that I didn't find it that hard.
It's mostly
Like,
just it's mostly just the extreme conditions, extreme weather that a lot of people aren't used to breaking through.
yeah, but I also just wanted to finish. It was not like a race where I was like, oh, I need to perform, so I make the criteria to qualify for the national team, or so it was. I'm just going to go out there and enjoy. Of course, I'll push hard and I'll give my best and try and win if I can. But it was really like stress-free as well.
That's awesome. Is there anything worth noting about the town that gets involved? Like,
Yeah,
from my understanding, this town is very desolate, and they all volunteer to make it happen, and they just get people from all over the world flying in to run this thing.
yeah, the volunteers are crazy. There's just people with like dogs and sleds following you, especially when it's really windy. So they show you the track because the track gets washed off by the snow. And it's crazy because at some places it's so steep, you go down the fjord, across the fjord, back up the other way, but it's like a proper just wall, just a cliff. So you can't even ski. You have to take your skis off and hike up. And people find it hard, but for me, I prefer doing this than skiing on the flats. So yeah, it's like it's physically more demanding, but it suits a lot more my skills than if it was like 100K of perfectly flat parts. The part of the race I hated the most was going across the fjord because it's salty water that has frozen, so it doesn't glide very well. It's dead flat, and you're so exposed to the wind. And I was like, when is this ever finished? And then I got to the bottom of that big wall where you have to take your skis out and run up, and I was like, yes, fuck yeah, that's what I want. And people are like, oh my god, no, it's so steep. I'm like, no, this is what we want. Come on, let's go. So yeah, I guess it is hard and extreme and challenging, but it's absolutely worth it. And I will take that over a road marathon in a heartbeat.
Okay. And there's like what is it, a 3-day event? So you do a certain section of the track, you return to you end at the base, sleep there, do the next day, end at the same base, and then the next day you actually go back to the starting line. So there's 2 bases that you stay at.
So one base. They used to have 2 bases, but logistically it was hard. And as you said, the volunteers, they already do such a big job, and it's so hard logistically for them to bring all the tents and take care of the aid station and making sure everyone makes it to the base, that in the end they've changed the routes, and you do kind of a flower with 2 pedals and you go down to the base, and the last day you go back down to the city. And when you get back after 3 days of seeing just the other competitors and the volunteers, you go back there and there's just like the entire village who comes and gathers and cheer for everyone until the last person arrives. It's really special because you can retell it's the main event of the year, and they love it, and they're super happy to be part of the race. It feels like everybody is connected to that race in a way. So it's really like a strong feeling in that regard. I think even if you come last, just the vibe of the people and it's such a culture that I mean, no one, like, not a lot of people are exposed to the Greenlandic culture, but you learn a lot about it. You can tell they're genuinely so happy to have foreigners coming in. So that's super cool in this regard.
Yeah, and what I could see from the center base, they can only access it via snowmobile. So you have to trek everything out there via snowmobiles and sleds, set up all these tents, this aid station that you mentioned, and the videos and the little bit of research I got to do about the Arctic Circle race. They have like massage tents and like first aid tents and everything, so you can really stop and recover, get a home cooked meal before you have to pass out and start the next day off.
Yeah, if you finish quickly, but I mean, quite a few people, they finish at 9 or 10 p.m. in the dark with their headlamp, and then it starts again at 8 the next day.
Yeah.
So you don't have that much time. It's good when you're one of the first finisher. It's not that of a big gap when you're just someone with a bit less athletic abilities.
How is that overlap with your dad? Because you're coming in the top of the pack, and then you're antsily waiting for your dad to show up so you guys can hang out and start off the next day together.
Yeah, I was so stressed. I was like, okay, I'm done with my race. I'll quickly eat, and then I'll make sure there's hot food and everything for when he arrives. But he did great. Yeah, he did really well, and he actually didn't take that like too long. He was doing quite all right. But because he wasn't pushing as hard as we were, because he didn't even consider winning, I think he paced himself really well and really stopped at every aid station, make sure he ate and drank a lot more during the race. And like if I was cold, I wouldn't stop and put a jacket on. I'll just push through.
Mm-hmm.
In some places I got really, really cold. Like when you're in the sun, it's fine. But when you're down in the valleys and you've got the breeze from the valley facing you, and it's just, you're fully in the shade, it's minus 30. Your eyelashes get all frozen. Like, and the tube of your drink belt gets frozen. It's really not that pleasant, but you just keep pushing, and you don't want to wear so many layers because it makes you slower. Whilst people are going a bit slower, they take the time to put a puffy jacket on maybe and fill up warm water at the aid station, stuff like this. So it's really a different approach, but also they kind of have to do this. And yeah, and it's great to see both sides and be with my dad, who just wanted to finish, and for him that's big enough of a challenge. And yeah, it was really special to race with him, actually.
I love that. I love that so much. Is there anything else you want to mention about the Arctic Circle race? Otherwise, I'd love to dive into some of the coaching experience that you have from your teams in Australia.
Yeah. No, I think that's about it for the Arctic Circle race. If the organizer ever listen to that podcast, I want them to know that I'm so grateful they invited me for the last 2 editions. And I'm sorry I couldn't make it here with my, I was getting surgery at the time.
Is it invite only, or is it invite only, or how do they actually take in the racers?
No, there's invites, but you can also sign up for the race on their website.
Okay. Because they only do a limited amount of spots, right?
Yeah, I think it's maybe a lottery. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But it's limited because, I mean, logistically, it must be a nightmare for them. And the volunteers, they work so hard. They just can't have the capacity of having 5,000 people up there sleeping in tents, and yeah.
For sure. All right. And so, yeah, in your story, you went off to Vermont and then eventually moved back to Australia, where you did cross-country ski coaching. Do you coach elsewhere too, or have you coached elsewhere?
So I coached for Australia for 4 years. Half of the year there in Australia, and then I was in the northern hemisphere, either Canada or Central Europe, but with them. And then COVID hit, so I sent all my athletes back home, and I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on, because we didn't know at the time. But I guess I'll see you in a month or so once everything chills out. But turns out the following year, I quickly realized I wasn't allowed to go back to Australia because I'm not a citizen, and they weren't allowed to come back to France or to Europe. And then I was in a job that I didn't like, working as a chief of sales in Geneva, and that didn't really suit me to be in an office, as you can imagine. And the British team for biathlon offered me a spot, and I was like, okay, I'll just come for the winter and then I'll go back to Australia. But turns out I'm 4 years down the road and I'm still working with them. I love when I see my ex-Australian athletes, and I'm still really attached to that country. And I'm so grateful for everything I've lived there, but it just makes sense now for me to stay here. And also the year I started coaching the British team, so the year after COVID, I became a bit more serious about running. So in the summer, I started working a bit less and wanting to run a bit more. And over the last few years, I'm still working absolutely full time during the winter. But in the summer, I do smaller missions and don't work all the time. And I will do a lot of online work for them as well, writing the training plans for them. And it's the British national team, but we've got quite a few dual citizens. So we've got a few in France, Germany, Canada. So it actually makes sense to coach online because they're not all at the same place anyway.
And these are all Olympic athletes, is that correct?
So quite a few of them are aiming for Cortina Olympics at the moment, and I really hope they will make it, and some of them deserve it. But they're quite young. They're under 23, the ones that I coach. There's a few older ones, but my main group is under 23 years old. So it's the Junior Olympic Games, that's every 4 years, that we go to, and then we're on the Junior World Cup.
Okay.
There's a special World Cup for under 23 athletes.
That's so interesting. I don't even know anything about like coaching for that level of sports. Like, can you maybe just shed some light on what goes into that, and like how many students do you have at a time, and how are you working with them to have them meet their goals? This is for cross country skiing and biathlon?
Yeah, but that's why you get so disappointed, because you think my job is just to go skiing every day, but it's really not. I drive the bus and then I sit on the shooting range with my scope and look at the impacts of their bullets on the targets, and I adjust that. And I do a lot of the logistic and a lot of the being a mom job. So I make sure they eat on time, they brush their teeth, and they take a shower every day. And I book the accommodations and transport them everywhere. And then, of course, I do the shooting coaching, and all the lovely part that I love is paperwork to go through customs, and that's always a pleasure to do. And then I do some writing the ski programs, recording them skiing so they can watch on videos their technique. And a lot is managing their emotions, which is quite hard when you're an athlete and you're trying to perform, setting goals. Just even simple things like trying to make them healthier, trying to make them stretch and drink enough water and go to bed early enough. All those things, they're just as important as the training you do. Yeah.
Are you writing unique workout plans for each of them?
At the moment, yes. In the summer, I do very individualized because they all have different schedules. Some of them work, some of them are at school. They don't have access to the same training facilities. But when it's winter, I individualize a bit based on how they feel and what suits them or not, because not everyone reacts the same way to training. But because the racing schedule is the same, it's very similar. There's a difference between boys and girls because they're on different schedules, but overall it's quite like they do. It's also important that they can do most of the sessions together. They train a lot alone most of the year, so if they can train as a group when they're with me from November, it's better.
Is it pretty common to kind of have these remote coaches in this level of athleticism? Or is that a new thing that spun up over COVID?
No, and with Australia, I was with them all year long almost. So it was really easy to coach all of them every day at the same place because we were 6 months in Australia, 6 months in Europe. But with the British, there's not so much biathlon in Great Britain, so they are all located in different places. There's a lot of athletes who have 2 passports. So they live and go to school in Canada, but they have a British passport and they race for us. So that's why they don't train all together.
Okay.
But this year, a lot of them will be based in France, actually, in the Pyrenees. So they'll be a bit more together. But it's really hard with them because also since Brexit, they can't stay more than 90 days in Europe. So you have to take this into account for some of them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm sure there's a ton of like political nightmares when you're dealing with this many countries and everything.
Yeah, especially when you've got rifles, because in the end, what we use are normal firearms. They're long rifle 22. So it's in some countries it can be a bit of a challenge, especially when they're all British, but one of them has got a French firearm license, the other one's got a Canadian one, and I'm like, oh my god, now I have to check all those regulations for all those countries.
I didn't even consider that because isn't like the UK and Australia, they are some of the most like stringent when it comes to firearm laws.
Yeah, but thankfully my boss is doing an amazing job with that, and quite often he does the firearm aspect of it because he's a lot more on top of things in that regard than I am.
Okay. I think you kind of hinted at this, but how did you actually get involved in the shooting portion of this? Is this something that you just grew up doing?
So when you're in ski clubs in France at the age of 14, it's kind of like mandatory, I guess. You just do biathlon races, and if you're in the top 10 of your age group, then you get the choice to be in the Rising Stars program for biathlon or cross country skiing, and then you choose whatever you want. And I chose biathlon. So then I learned how to shoot, and then I got my first rifle when I was 15, maybe 14, maybe. But yeah, so I learned how to do it and the basics and how to handle a gun and the safety around it, because you need to be careful with those kind of things.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I feel like we went through pretty much everything that I wanted to go through. So at this point, do you have any like memories, standout moments, or stories that you like to bring up or tell throughout your life so far? We kind of went into your accident, which is crazy within itself. I don't know what else comes to mind within your travels.
No, I think like sports for me is super important. I need it to be balanced, like to have a balanced life. And yes, sometimes you get caught up into sport and you forget what's around. And often people see athletes as, oh, you're just seeing a stadium and training and that's all you do. But for me, I think I've done more things because of sport than if I was just doing regular studies and then a regular job. Because that's what pushed me to go to the US and study. Then in Australia, that's what pushed me to travel more, see more. I got invited to some really, really cool places to either ski or race. I've been to some Olympic events either as a girlfriend because I was dating a professional skier or a coach. I've been skiing or running in every continent, I think.
Wow.
But South America. But yeah, Asia, Africa, Greenland, Canada, US, Kazakhstan, Korea, yeah. And so it's a pretty cool way for me to live my dreams. It's not for everyone, and not everybody should do it for sure, but Yeah, I think when I'll stop being an athlete, and I think it's clear in my head that I will, I won't remember the races and the performances. I'll remember everything around it. The places I've been, the people I've met, the shitty stories I ended up in, because there's quite a few of them. It would be too long to go over all of them at the moment, but yeah.
Do any particular ones come to mind that you want to tell? Because those are the ones that last, right? They are horrible at the time, but you probably tell them all the time just because they're funny now, or you learned something from it.
I've got nothing in particular in mind. I'm sure it will come back, but yeah. But I've also
No,
done some shitty jobs that are not related at all with skiing. I was telling you earlier, I used to pick up watermelons in Australia and wipe them and then put them in boxes. And I was working without a work permit, so illegally with some random other people from God knows which country, in a shed. And at the time you think, what am I doing here? Just working for basically no money, just picking. And I'm like, why watermelons? They're so heavy. Do you know how heavy a watermelon is? It's freaking heavy when you carry them 14 hours a day.
oh my
But
god,
it are great memories, and I've loved it.
Iris, the skier, the paraglider, the watermelon polisher.
Yeah.
No, I think this is good. I like how you summarized all that and summarized the the athlete lifestyle and kind of your next steps for everything.
I can tell you my favorite paragliding ride if you want.
What's that?
I can tell you my favorite paragliding flight if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. It still blows my mind that that's like so natural for you. Like when I get over to Europe, when I get over to the Alps, the Swiss Alps or whatever, I know you can just sign up for tandem paragliding. That's something I've always wanted to do. But yeah, go ahead and tell us about your favorite story.
You can do it in the US.
There's a lot of people that do it out in California and stuff like that, and they just do it
I've flown
as
in
hobbyists, but what's that?
I've flown in Moab.
Okay, in Utah?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Uh,
That's cool.
Anyway, I had a brand new wing, so I was very proud of my brand new paraglider. So I took it for a little ride, and I usually go in the evening when the wind pushes you down the valley. And I go up above my house, take off at the usual takeoff I take off every day. And I start doing like turns and twists and trying to feel my wing a bit better and try new things. And then I go to the landing in my parents' garden, and I'm a bit short, but the wind is backing me because I'm flying in the morning and it's pushing me back up the valley, and I want to land down in the valley. And there's some trees, and I'm like, ooh, can I make it through the trees, or am I gonna hit the trees? I'm like, oh, maybe there's a road, so the trees split up. Like maybe if I go perfectly in the middle, my ass will be lower than the trees, but the wing will still be above the trees, and I'll be fine. So okay, I'll do that. And I go right in front of the trees, and I'm like, oh, it's gonna be really short. You know what? I'm just gonna play it safe. I'll turn around and land on the golf course. And I turn around and I go above the golf course that is just next to my parents' house. And there's a golfing competition. And I'm like, oh, it is so embarrassing if I just crash on the golfing competition. And also, if they don't see me and I got hit by a golf ball, that's gonna really hurt. Okay, I'll just go next to the golf course in the golf owner's garden. And as I wanted to land in his garden, thinking I was perfectly safe, then I was lower, so the tree blocked the wind, and I ended up crashing in his tree.
Oh no.
Didn't really crash, I crashed, but I didn't hurt myself. And I was like, oh, that's better than being in the golf course where everybody sees me and I'll be so embarrassed. The thing is, the entire golf course saw it. And I was stuck in the tree, but I was almost making it. But I didn't want to pull the brakes and fall from 3 meters high. I was like, it is just so stupid. I'm just going to sprain my ankle. Whereas if I just land on the tree, it will absorb the shock. And yeah, it's going to be a bit of a shit show, but I won't hurt myself. So here I am with my harness going right up my butt crack, the paraglider being stuck in the tree, and my feet are literally 15 centimeters from the ground. I'm just hanging there feeling so miserable. And there's 200 people who just cross the road, take their phones out and start recording and taking photos of me. And I'm like, oh my God. And there's nothing I can do. I can't hide. I'm just stuck there. And they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, well, yeah. And like, does anything hurt? And I'm like, yeah, my feelings, they really hurt right now. And I'm like, well, what can we do? And I'm like, well, you need to take a ladder, because if you start to like pull me, it will destroy my wing, because the branch was poking out. I was like, oh, my brand new wing, it's all damaged now. I don't want to make more damages. And yeah, it was the longest 15 minutes of my life, with everybody just recording me and all the cars down the road stopping to take photos of me. I'm just hanging there, nowhere to hide. And I think that's on the top of the most embarrassing moments of my life. There you
That's
go.
amazing. You're like trying to get help from these total strangers, but at the same time, they're just making it so much worse.
Yeah, and the thing is, the golf owner comes up and he's like, oh, Iris, why didn't you land on the golf course? And he has that sort of everyone. And I'm like, well, I was scared to be embarrassed if someone's realized I fucked up my landing. He's like, yeah, how's that working for you now? I'm like, yeah, not quite good. I'm even more embarrassed right now.
It's even better that he like knew you by name.
Yeah, well, I think I wasn't even down the tree. My dad was already phoning me like, I've heard there's a paraglider in the tree. Like, is it you? And I'm like, well, yeah, of course it's me, Dad.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. Well, great. I think Iris, I think we're gonna close it up from there. Is there any shout offs or handoffs you wanna give? How can people find you?
No, just enjoy doing sports and everything. And I hope you found it interesting.
I did. There was a lot. I did not expect all this when we started this, but you've lived a very interesting life so far, and that's the exact thing we want to have on this show and things I want to talk about. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to come on too.
I will listen to the other episodes and to you talking about other people as well. Because
Yes.
I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things in everyone.
Yeah, we got some good stories about like Alaska, people doing like dog sled races, snowmobile races, doing like a fat tire race through Alaska. I think with your winter background, you'd get a kick out of some of that.
Yeah.
I can definitely share those.
Yeah, Alaska is definitely on the bucket list.
Do the ITI. If you're a cross country skier, you can do the Iditarod Trail Invitational. You can do 350 miles or 1,000 miles cross country skiing.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah, I'd love to do this.
Yeah, it sounds nuts because they don't necessarily have camps for you. They have checkpoints, but there's often cases where you can't make it to the checkpoints, and so people will just take their pack and they'll actually sleep in the woods for the night, get a few hours of sleep, pack up, and just continue onward for the rest of their trip. So a lot of extreme weather that you gotta go through for that.
That's perfect. The shittier the weather, usually the better I do.
Thank you for listening to the High Quality Fun podcast. If you guys enjoyed this show, please give us a follow. And if you have a good story or just want to say hi, feel free to reach out to us on Instagram or YouTube. Thanks for listening.